So if part of what an interest group does is try to convince those members of government to try to enact certain policy or try to enforce certain policy that has already been enacted, it's the job of the lobbyist who works for that interest group to help try to convince those members of Congress or even a member of a bureaucracy on how these policies can best be enacted or enforced. Lobbyists are people who are very informed about their topics. So if you are a lobbyist for someone like Education Minnesota, the teachers union, you are going to be very well versed in education policy. You're also going to be very knowledgeable about the things that teachers experience in the workplace or what can be done to improve the quality of education of students. All of those sorts of things, because you will be, because of the content that you have to deal with and the people you have to talk to, an expert in that area. Same thing for those that lobby for the NRA or for the NAACP, are all going to be experts in those areas. So therefore, they're able to use information as their most effective tool to try to convince people to either vote for a certain bill or to enforce a policy in a certain way if you're in the executive branch. Now, the lobbyists seek to gain access to public officials in all different branches of government and at all different levels of government. So we see lobbyists not just in Washington, D.C., but we also see lobbyists in state capitals throughout the country and even in some of the larger cities that deal with these different major issues. Now, why is it important not just to have information, but also to have access to these government officials? Okay. Why do you think that access is important? You can have all of the information that you need, but if you can't sit down to the people that are making the decisions because they won't talk to you, is it going to help you at all? No. If you can't get your foot in the door, it's not going to matter. So sometimes what we then see is that a lot of our lobbyists are former public officials themselves. They're former members of Congress, or they're former governors, or they served in a state legislature. Why might an interest group want to hire as a lobbyist someone who used to be in Congress? Are they going to be knowledgeable about the process of lawmaking? Yes, that gives them an edge up. Might they be very knowledgeable about certain areas? Could be environmental, could be tax related, could be education related, healthcare related. Yes. But what else are they going to have that many of these other non-members of government won't have? Harrison.
Credibility and people know them.
The what?
People know them.
People know them. The people that they're going to try to influence are their former colleagues and friends, the people they used to work with. So if someone then who's now not in Congress, maybe they lost an election, they get a job as a lobbyist, then they call up their buddy that they used to know who's still in the House of Representatives. Is that person likely to take their phone call? Is that person likely to go out to lunch with them? Does that give them a foot in the door? So when lobbyists come from the public sector like this into private lobbying firms, it's oftentimes because of that access, and that's what they're paying for. Now, does this then run the risk of turning into kind of like for lack of a better word, like a good old boys club? Is it more about who you know and rather than what you know? And then do we run the risk of people getting, enacting bad policy just to appease their friends? Quite possibly. Okay. Now, because of this, attempts have been made to regulate lobbyists. However, every single loophole that they seem to make, someone finds a way around it. There used to be stories about lobbyists who would pay for members of Congress to take lavish vacations with their families to places like Disney World, and that the lobbyists would pay for that whole week for their family to go visit Disney World in return for their support on a particular bill. They would give them, fancy rental homes along the California coast along the ocean. Or there was one story about a member of Congress who wanted to go play the historic golf courses in Scotland. And so they paid to fly this guy out to Scotland and to play at all these fancy courses that are out there. And that gained influence into how that member of Congress voted. There's stories about lobbyists providing the fanciest dinners for members of Congress. So they've tried to limit some of these things. And for example, one of the regulations that they have made is now the only thing that lobbyists can serve to a member of Congress as far as food goes, whatever it is, it has to be served on a stick. Kind of like state fair style. So how do you think they've kind of gotten around this regulation? What kind of loopholes have they made in order to get around having this food on a stick? It was supposed to be, like a small little toothpick size bites of things. Well, what do you do to get around that?
Just put a stick in it.
Make it a longer stick, right? Find a way to get fancy lobster tail to go off a long skewer, right? Their finest steak served on a stick, right? So that's some of the things that they've done to try to undermine some of these different types of regulations. But the question that I have is, in our chapter on public opinion, we talked about the difference between public opinion, the collective views of all of the people about a certain topic or issue, versus public judgment, which are the knowledgeable expert views. Which do you think lobbyists really have? Are they merely people with public opinion, or do you think that they are people with public judgment? You don't have to, just quickly answer. Are they public opinion? Are they public judgment? We should see hands right here, right? Because they do have the more knowledgeable and expert views towards these different topics. Okay, interest groups in the political system. Am I running out of time here? Okay, we'll finish this one up and we'll get really close. Numerous factors determine the success or failure of interest groups. The assets that they have, not just the money in the bank, but their ability to access information and their ability to spread it to others. The objectives or goals of the groups. Sometimes groups align themselves with particular parties or with other groups. Okay? The NRA is very closely aligned to which of our parties? The Republican Party. Okay? The AFL-CIO, labor union, is closely aligned to which party? The Democratic Party. Okay? Because it helps them achieve their goals. Interest groups often form relationships called iron triangles, with the interest group being outside of government and a congressional committee of the legislative branch and a bureaucratic agency of the executive branch. Just know that iron triangles exist right now. We'll talk more about them when we talk about bureaucracies. Okay? The success of a group can also depend on political changes. If we see Democrats pick up a lot of seats in the House of Representatives, which is what they're predicting right now after a week from today's election, what could we then expect about the type of policy that will be coming out of the House of Representatives, and therefore the interest groups that have influence over those policies because they've perhaps aligned themselves with the Democratic Party? Okay? As well as certain depictions in the media. Now, every interest group is going to have lobbyists who have relationships with members of Congress, and they vary about degree of influence. You know, a lobbyist for the NRA, for example, might not be able to get a foot in the door of a Democratic lawmaker's office. However, the Republican one, they'll probably almost let the NRA write the legislation and they just pass it off as their own to try to submit it. You could make the same case about environmental issues on the Democratic side, or whatever the topic happened to be. And then there's different levels here in between. Okay? Finally, the media are often critical of lobbyists. Lobbyists do serve an important role, though, in getting needed information to the people who make the decisions about our policy. They use different types of techniques, as we've talked about: advertising, public relations, and advocating on behalf of that particular issue in that group. But the news media tends to focus on the few interest groups that are the largest. For example, the NRA, the American Association of Retired Persons, and the AFL-CIO as a few. Okay, I know we got really fast at the end, but these notes are here for you. Any questions? Okay.